Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm Dustin with Costly Hobby, and today I'm gonna be making some strides on the 87 Bronco by getting it painted and finally starting to put it back together. Let's go. Now, I dubbed this thing the Bronco because clearly there's a lot wrong with it. The engine barely runs, it has no brakes, 4 flat tires all the way around, obvious rust issues, and any fluids that were in this thing are now on my shop floor. So instead of fixing any of that, the first thing I wanted to do to make this thing good is paint it. So in my last video, you saw me get this thing prepped and sanded, skinned in 4 coats of high build primer, and then we finished off with block sanding it all the way up to a 600 grit fine paper. And then off camera, I had to redo some of the masking because it got wet and gross during our block sanding. And then I also added this gravel guard to the windshield cowl as well as the lower body line all the way around. And I do this because it A, looks pretty cool, B, helps with rust prevention, and C, looks pretty cool. Everyone that knows me knows that I am an absolute rocker guard fiend, and you're honestly lucky I didn't just coat the entire Bronco in it because I genuinely debated it, but I thought I could make it look nice and smooth and glossy instead. Now, even though I have a bunch of rust around all the wheel wells, I'm really not worried about it because that's gonna get covered up by a fender flare. And again, this is a budget job. I'm not too worried about it. Same goes for the badge backing. I didn't remove all the adhesive junk that was there because it was just gooey and gross and I didn't wanna mess with it too much before I did it. I'm just gonna double side tape the badge back on over it so you're not gonna see it anyways. And then if we get up really close, you'll notice that my block sanding isn't exactly the best either. There's still some pitting and low spots in the primer, but I'm not too worried about that either because ultimately I only need this thing to look good from about 40 feet away. So naturally, to hide all of those imperfections I decided to leave behind, I decided to go with a really high gloss black. So I went into my local body shop supply store and I asked them for the cheapest possible gloss black paint they had, and they gave me this. It's super cheap. It's for like trailers and semi-truck tractors and stuff like that. It is a single stage, which is good because who has time to do base coat, clear coat? Ultimately, I'm hoping that it lays down smooth or is at least durable enough that I can go back and cut and buff it later on without damaging it. And to lay that down, I'm just using a standard 1.4 millimeter Mastercraft HVLP gravity feed gun. This is a Canadian Tire brand, but I think it's the equivalent to like Harbor Freight or something like that in the States. It's just your standard 2-stage trigger gun. So you have your air and then your fluid and then your air and then your fluid and then your air and then nothing and then your air and then your fluid. And we could keep going, but you get it. To show you my air setup, this is just a dirty old 30-gallon air compressor that I got like 5 years ago from Princess Auto, which again, I believe Harbor Freight would be the exact same thing. I've connected that to a stupidly long air line because apparently you want as much room from the tank to your filters as you possibly can. And it goes to this janky little wall thing here, and I'll explain that here. As the air comes in here, I've created a little bit of a water trap here, and you can see that's for draining water and debris that gets stuck in the line for when I need to. This air outlet is just for like my regular air tools that I run that don't need water protection. And then when I am painting, I run that to a wall mounted air dryer that you can put like new air beads and however that works in science up to a regulator, and then that's my hose that I use for painting. So I'll quickly get an air regulator onto my gun and then get suited up in this fancy dancy save your clothes thing, and then I think we're on to mixing and paint. Let's go.
Okay, so we've gone and tack clothed it. I'm all suited up. Now we are ready to mix paint and start laying color. So a single stage urethane is still a 2-part paint. That means you need to mix your color with your activator with your reducer. In this case, it's at a 4:1:1 ratio. That's not always the case. Always check your paint. As always, I like to mix a half gallon or so at a time. That way I don't have to keep remixing every time I need to refill my gun while I'm laying color. So when I say 4:1:1, I mean this ratio right here. And this is just your standard paint mixer's cup. Most body shops have them, and this is what you're always gonna wanna use when you're mixing a 2-stage paint. You can see all of the different ratios here. Obviously, I'm looking for 4:1:1. So I'm gonna fill mine all the way up to this 6 here in color, and then to the next 6 in hardener, and then the next 6 up in reducer. And some people, depending on your temperature of your location and stuff, Sometimes you want to thin it out a little bit less and you'll put in less reducer. Other times you'll want to actually thin it out even more and you'll go a little bit above that. Let's go ahead and get our paint pouring. Then we'll add our hardener. And finally, our reducer. Clean up the mess you make when you spill reducer everywhere, and then go in and give it a nice stir. If you can, it's always nice to have a second pair of hands. That way you don't have to hold absolutely everything. For instance, while you're straining your paint into the gun, you have to hold a filter, the gun, and pour the paint, and there's only so much you can do with two hands. Usually guys will have a paint gun holder, but I'm not fancy, so I have a life. Always double, triple, quadruple check the seal on your paint cap. I have more than many times had a bad seal and spilled paint all over my workpiece. Oh, it came out of the breather tube there. After we double checked everything, we should be good to spray color. But always double check your spec sheet for your paint to make sure that you've set your gun up properly. For instance, this paint with a 1.4 millimeter nozzle wants to be at about 35 to 40 PSI. So that's what I'm gonna set my gun at, and then I'm gonna test my spray pattern, usually with a cardboard box or something. You can adjust your spray pattern with that little knob right there. Further out, wider spray pattern. Further in, more of a circle. You want it to be about a 6-7 inch fan. I've already got my gun set to 35 PSI. As you can see, I've used this box before. We're just gonna check our spray pattern. That actually doesn't look too bad. Normally I would adjust just for the show, but in this case, it looks pretty good. Let's run with it. When you're working from above and doing a top-down paint approach, what I like to do is put my air hose around my neck to make sure that it's not going to accidentally touch the surface of any other panel. That way, if it is already painted, you're not going to wreck your paint. And if it's not painted, you're not going to get your nice clean panel dirty and full of dust. That's going to react poorly with your paint. So we're going to go in nice, long, even strokes, about 8 to 10 inches away from the panel, maybe closer depending on how our spray pattern looks on the workspace. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to do a quick, light tack coat, let that flash off, and then we'll come back with either 1 or 2 medium coats to give it that nice glossy shine finish. And then after, we might even do what's called a drop coat or a mist coat, which just kind of blends all of the potential streaking together really nicely. I can already see some spots where I missed my cleanup, but that's okay because it's the roof. I'm less worried about the roof. The panel I care most about is actually the hood, because that's the panel that you see the most while you're driving, and everyone else sees the most when they're looking at it. So coat 1 is done. I'm gonna let that flash off for about 15 minutes, 1-5, before I go back and do round 2 to try and get a nice glassy finish. Okay,
And that is, I went with 2 instead because I felt like that first coat wasn't much of a light tack coat. It really was more of a medium coat. So then the second coat, I actually just went full heavy top coat. And I think it worked out okay. A little bit of orange peel, but I've got a lot of nibbing already happening on it. And that's okay, I can go back and cut and buff it later on. All in all though, it doesn't look too bad. I'm pretty happy with it. So I'm gonna leave it, let it sit for a little while. The air is absolutely horrible in here, so I honestly should not be breathing in here without a mask already. I'm gonna go in the house, get myself cleaned up, and I'll come back tomorrow morning and we'll start getting this thing, you know, put back together, maybe. Okay, it's been a couple of days. I let the Bronco completely dry, and now that it's cured, I admittedly have a few regrets. Let's check it out. So to start us off, you can see all the dust specks in the cured paint, and that's because I'm in a really dirty, non-professional shop environment, and that's just kind of what you get. But you'll also see this crazy amount of orange peel, and that is because I probably used too large of a nozzle. I should have gone with like a 1.2 or a 1.3, and you know, just been a better painter. But that's okay because it just means more content for you guys when I have to come back and cut and buff and polish this thing in a later video, which I'll probably do in the next couple of weeks or so because I need to get this thing moved. But in the meantime, I'm gonna focus on more critical items to the Vision, such as wheels. I recently went on Marketplace and scored these 17-inch alloys for a measly $50, and they might look a little bit crusty right now, but in the next few minutes, you're gonna watch me make them shine. Now keep in mind that the Bronco still runs like ass and it still doesn't stop. But as the old adage goes, if you look good, you feel good. So that's what I'm gonna focus on. Now admittedly, I have never done this on wheels before, but I figure it can't be too hard and I thought it might be fun to learn together. So I went on Amazon and my local parts store and I bought all the things that I thought would be necessary, including fine grit sandpaper, some polishing wheels, a drill to run it all, and just a few other things just to see if we can make this shine. I did watch some other YouTube tutorials and they told me you gotta sand it first. So I got these discs that I can barely get in. Ow! That's gonna leave a mark. I'm gonna give those a shot. They make these things impossible to open. Okay, I'm gonna start with a 240 grit just to see what it does. I have a feeling that is gonna fly off in my face. Let's find out. Man, I don't like taking sandpaper to wheels. That didn't last very long. Put another one on. Okay guys, that settles it. This thing is still the best. I spent way too much time trying to get into the nooks and crannies and curves of this wheel. This thing, I literally did that for like 30 seconds and now it's in a state that I can actually continue polishing it. So I'm gonna move up to a much finer grit now, start kind of being a little more gentle to it, and then we'll hit it with the actual polishing like clays and the things that they use. Now I've got this 320 grit sanding sponge that I picked up from my auto parts store, and I'm hoping it'll get rid of some of the sanding scratches on the wheel from the burnishing machine and everything else that I've done to this thing. That's admittedly not working so hot, so I'm gonna try it with some actual 400 grit sandpaper instead. Okay, it's not perfect at all, but I think I'm happy enough with it that I might just move on to trying the clay bars. So I went on Amazon and I bought these polishing compounds as well as some wool pad things that you attach to a drill. So I'm gonna try this black one here first because apparently that's the one you use on metal for deep scratches. And I'm gonna see if it can get rid of the remaining scratches from this wheel before I move on to brown, white, then red, green, and blue in that order to go from rough to absolute finest. So I've got kind of a wool dome pad like thing on here. And again, I'm not sure which attachment is right. And then my black clay, I'm gonna use that. And I think you just kind of get it on there. Although that doesn't seem to want to come off very well. Let's see, maybe I could just, what if I just put it on here? Maybe that's the ticket today. I doubt this is how you're supposed to do things. But since when did we do things right? It's kind of like coloring. Okay, you know what, we'll give that a shot and then we'll just see what it does anyways. Coloring might have been a bad idea. Just gonna go ahead and start over. I'll try this again. Then we'll move on to the brown one. White one. Just gonna jump right to green. And we'll finish it off with blue. Okay, are they perfect? Absolutely not. But are they leagues better than when we started? 147%. I am happy enough to put these on the Bronco. Like I said, it's a budget unit. It doesn't need to be show quality. And for 50 bucks and a little bit of polishing gear, that's pretty good to me. I did order these Bronco specific hubcaps off of Amazon and they were chrome, so I was hoping to get it to match as well as I could. And honestly, I'm not too disappointed with the results. So yes, you could absolutely get better results if you were a little bit more patient than me and if you knew what you were doing, but good enough. So now I've got 3 more to do, which I'm not gonna make you watch again, and then I'll put some new rubber on it and we can finally get started putting this whole deal back together. Let's go. Okay, all 4 wheels are finally polished and they are ready to go get new tires put on them, which I already have, but it's currently a Sunday and no shop is open. So I'm gonna move on to other things such as brakes and finally getting this thing to run properly, which I think is actually just a fuel line, but we'll see when we dive into it. Anyways, you may notice that I have a lift at my disposal, and normally I would be using that lift so that I can put the Bronco in the air, rip the wheel off, and figure out what is going on with the brakes and why I don't have any. But there is a ton of junk behind the Bronco. I've got a spare engine back there, a hoist, a stand, all of the wheels that I just polished, and all of the garbage left over from the wheels that I just polished. I don't really feel like moving any of that yet, and the Bronco is about 8 feet too far forward to go on the lift. So because I'm lazy, instead I'm just gonna use a regular floor jack, rip the wheel off, and figure out why I am leaking fluid all over my shop floor. doesn't seem totally right. Okay, so on first inspection, everything actually looks really dry on this side, which is kind of inconvenient because I genuinely believed that it was just gonna be like a punctured brake line at the caliper on this side from where I thought it was leaking. But that means we gotta go searching a little bit more. I'm gonna throw some fluid in this thing and see if we can trace it down the line. Oh, I'm actually full of fluid. Huh. Now I'm really confused because this thing was leaking brake fluid everywhere, and yet the reservoir is full, and I have no brakes. Bleed them and find out, I guess. Now, when you're bleeding brakes by yourself, this tool right here is going to save your ass. Simple as that. It's like 20 bucks from Harbor Freight, but you just crack the line, make sure that your brake pedal is pushed down. I've got mine set in with a bar against the seat, and then pump, 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 pump until you see fluid. And that's it. And then you move on to the next one. Now, normally you would want to start with the wheel furthest away from your master cylinder because that's the furthest distance and the most potential for air to get caught in the line. But because I'm just looking for a leak that I am fairly certain is isolated somewhere in the front, I'm going to start here. Plus, I already have the wheel off, so. Oh, you rusty junk. Or not. If it's too rusty to turn, apply heat. No problem. Then we put our fancy tool on and just pump, 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 pump until we see a nice stream of fluid going through that line. So there's no air in that line, and I'm not actually seeing a leak where I thought I would, so I'm gonna move over to the other side and do the exact same thing. Okay, I've gone and bled all the brakes, and now that brake pedal is stiffer than an old man on Cialis. So I'm gonna move on to figuring out why this thing won't stay running anymore. It did run before I parked it for years, so I think time might have just been unkind to our fuel pump. So because our mechanical fuel pump is actually underneath all that garbage, and I don't want to move that right now because that's a hassle, I'm actually going to run a line straight from the carb to an electric pump I bought off Amazon straight to a tank line. So this is just a standard 2-wire electric fuel pump that I think runs at like 7 to 10 PSI, which is right around where the carburetor needs to be. I buy these in bulk for like 12 bucks off of Amazon because I use them on so many different things, and it just helps me bypass the mechanical fuel pump in most of these units. It's pretty straightforward. You got one fuel line in, one fuel line out, 2 wires, ground and power, and the moment those have power, it's gonna start pumping fuel. Now my fuel inlet on the carburetor is on the passenger side, but my fuel line is on the driver's side. However, because most of my power that I can tap into is also on the passenger side with the starter relay and all that, I think what I'm gonna do is mount this onto the passenger side inner wheel well, and then we'll connect our wires and our lines and see if we can make something work. Okay, we'll see if we can get lucky and reuse some of our old fuel line. Put on the carb. There. Oh, look at that. Perfect length. My favorite part about putting it right here is when I inevitably have a fuel leak, it'll catch on fire by spilling onto the headers. And then we'll run this side over to our fuel pump outlet, which is right here. Okay, and it looks like I'm gonna tap right into my coil. More things that they make impossible to open. For the time being, we can do something fancier later. Okay, so now I have brakes all around, and I ran a new fuel pump and new fuel lines to our carburetor, so that should get rid of our fuel issues, meaning this thing should stay running. I do still have it on the jack. I didn't even bother to put jack stands under it because I'm not crawling under there, but I'm gonna open the door and see if I can get this thing to fire up and maybe even idle. Okay, so obviously that didn't work, but this time I think it's actually a spark issue, and I think I know why. I had the power for our fuel pump running directly into the power for the coil, and while that works, it does run the 12-volt fuel pump, I think it's actually stealing power away from the coil and not letting that spark when it needs to. I've actually had that issue on another vehicle before, and I didn't really think about it. I figured it would be fine, but I'm gonna find another quick power for this, and then we should be good to go. Scrap that. I was actually right about our leaking fuel pump, so I'm gonna quickly change those fittings out because it's leaking from the threads itself, and I don't have any gas line thread. So I'll fix that really quick, and then we'll be good to go. All right, everything's a little bit safer now, and I'll move the wires around, so let's try it again and see what happens. Okay, if you could smell in here right now, you would understand what my latest issue is. It turns out I have extremely bad gas in that tank, which makes total sense. I did top it off with about 5 gallons of really high octane fuel just to see if I can make it work, but I guess that wasn't enough to offset the absolute varnish that is in this entire fuel system. So what I'll do now is I'll disconnect my fuel line from my carburetor, and I'm gonna run it down into a bucket and just let that thing run and pump all of the bad fuel out of the tank. And then I'll put some fresh stuff in and we should be good to go again. And take 47. Let's go. Okay, we are clearly having a carb issue as well. I'm sure all that bad varnish just gummed everything up in here. So I'm gonna quickly throw another one on, see if it's any better. I just pulled it off the shelf, so I doubt it, but give it a shot anyways. So it turns out that everything we just did was completely useless, and it all led back to the carburetor. I know that because if you notice, I plumbed our electrical fuel pump into the mechanical fuel pump outlet. That way our mechanical fuel pump more or less just acted as like an empty line or something like that. And now I disconnected our electrical fuel pump from any power source and cranked it, and we just spit fuel everywhere, which means that whole setup, pointless. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm just gonna run that line right into there and see if it works. We should be able to just yeet that entire thing right out of there. Throw our regular old line right back on there. And now we can try again for the 332nd time. Finally, we got this thing to run and idle on its own. Obviously, we have some idle adjustment to do, but that's better than where we started. Now that we know this thing runs and theoretically stops, I can finally move on to the important part of putting it back together. And that means venturing out into my yard to find the headlights, the bumper, the grille, the fender flares, the tail lights, and the mirrors, everything that I removed from this thing about 2.5 years ago. Did I mention that I don't know where all of that is? And if I did find it, I have absolutely no idea where any of the fasteners are. So yeah, that should be fun. And as much as I would love to make you watch that, I don't think anybody really needs to see this gut crawling under here to bolt on a bumper. There's no real value in that. So instead, I'm gonna skip ahead to when this thing is fully assembled, wheels and tires mounted, sitting outside in the sun, glistening in all its glory, so that you can enjoy the fruits of my labors. Let's go. All Alright guys, and that is it. The Bronco is finally back together after so many years, and honestly, I couldn't really be happier with it. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. But it is leagues better than where we started, and that's really all Hot Rod is about. So I'm gonna leave this one here, but if you love car content and hot rod culture, make sure to subscribe to the channel because I have to come back and give this thing a pretty hefty cut and buff, and I always have something happening around the shop. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.